share something that you've done at least annually for 10 years or more. And if you're under 30, you could say 5 years or more, intentionally every year for 5 years or more, but 10 years would be better. What comes to your mind? And it can't be your career, it can't be your education, it can't be like that kind of stuff, not job or education related.
Starting in 2011, I had a gentleman who was teaching us about leadership lessons and how to be intentional about your own leadership. And he said, every year you should write yourself a letter. Ooh. And he said, you can do it whenever you want, but write a letter that says, this is something that where I'm going to tell myself how I want to think about my next year, and use it as a anchoring point for the following year. And so I wrote myself a Christmas letter every year that says, this is where I am today, and this is where I want to be when I read this letter next year, and when I'm preparing my next letter. And this is how I want this year to go. These are the things I want to do. This is how I want to spend time in my work and in my family and with my friends and future trips and all the wonderful things I want to do for the year. And then you get to compare. And sometimes you don't do any of those things. Most of the time you do most of them or some of them. But it gives you some context for what you were thinking and how that's changed, and really why you were thinking that. And you're trying to go into some detail about like, what were you really thinking about, or why were you thinking about doing that thing? And was that really what you wanted?
That is brilliant advice. That is so fascinating.
It's such a fun letter every year.
So when do you prepare the letter, and when do you look at the one from last year?
I usually use the end of the year as my time frame. So in December, I look at the years past, and I use that a little bit as like, is there anything I could sneak in here or should sneak in here? Or was what I did so far sufficient, or am I happy? And then start thinking about what's my next year gonna look like. I've missed one letter.
Okay, question. Do you hand write it, like longhand, like in a notebook, or do you type it?
Type it.
And do you print it out and fold it up and put it in an envelope and like crack open the envelope, or do you just open the file?
I have a file in the back that's my Christmas letters, and it's a big file of all the letters I've written to myself.
Do you share it with anyone?
No, I don't. I do write it to my family, though. And I do that intentionally, because if for some reason I were to have something horrific happen, they could read what I was thinking about and why I was thinking about it. And they could understand what I was thinking and what I was thinking about my family and the people I love. And I'm hopeful that that would be maybe a little bit of solace about what my priorities were.
I love that. I want to do that.
It's pretty cool.
It is. It's a great idea.
That was an Air Force Academy thing. I have to give them credit. I was at the Air Force Academy for a semester.
Air Force Academy.
And Lieutenant Colonel Tewksbury in a leadership class taught me that, and I have never stopped.
I mean, it's certainly writing down goal setting, it's journaling, it's reflecting, looking back, looking forward, making it a practice. I mean, there's so many qualities of it. It's very interesting. I have never met someone who did that. I like that. Is there anything that comes to mind that you thought you weren't gonna like, and somebody really convinced you to try it, and actually it turned out to be like a really super fun thing?
I remember having escargot the first time, and I was like, I'm in Paris specifically, and I have to just try escargot. It is what it is. It's a thing. They all say it's great. It's gonna taste like crap. And I knew that was what I had in my mind. And I actually thought it was quite lovely. It didn't really taste like much. It tasted like the sauce that's in it, and so.
And then what's another one?
So this is actually a really good one, which is swimming. So going back to high school and elementary school even, I had very close friends who were swimmers. Their family got them swimming when they were 3 or 4, and we spent tons of time in the pool together. I hated the pool, but I liked to run. I found that out kind of in middle school. And we had a small high school, and so we needed people on our teams. And so we made a trade. I need cross-country runners, you guys need swimmers. So I will swim for you, and I'm a body, and I'll like swim okay, it's fine. And you'll run for me, and you'll run fine, but like the middle of the pack is what really scores the points and gets the team across the line. And so I did it for many years. And then I ended up being a reasonably good swimmer. I'm not a great swimmer by any means, but now I've done a ton of swimming, open water swimming, swum a couple miles at a couple different times, and was a Navy diver, and was very strong in the pool during all that time. And it's definitely a place I feel very, very comfortable. And so much so, there are times when I can't get a run in because it's freezing outside or whatever. And so I'll hop in the pool and I'll go swim 2,000 yards. And it just feels great. Just lose your mind in it and just think about everything else. It's my version of meditation.
That is so fascinating because you indeed are a Navy man now.
Yes.
Which does have a large swim and water component.
100%.
Right? Okay. So then keep talking. Yeah. Tell me then, did that have anything to do with choosing service in the Navy over something else?
No, my naval decision came a little bit from my dad. So my dad was a physician assistant and was previously a hospital corpsman for the Navy.
Oh, okay.
He actually served for the majority of his time at Camp Lejeune, where my headquarters is based out of. And he tells many stories very fondly of his corpsman time, and then went and became a PA. And this was in the time when PAs were very new. PAs were created in Duke in the mid-'70s, and then only were really more widespread in the late 70s, early 80s. And I remember him telling me that at his graduation, the keynote speaker said, "I'm really proud of all of you for taking the education you got as medics," because everyone was a medic back then, "and turning it into something very useful. You are all very, very, very capable, but I have no idea what you're going to do with the skills you have because nobody's willing to hire you right now. So really good luck. And I hope that this goes well." And that was what my dad heard when he graduated. And he's had a very long career and has been a leader in physician assistant education, was an educator and had a PA program that he started and ran and had 4 campuses. And I grew up sitting in the back of his classrooms. And so it was watching that and watching his dedication to being a medic and to taking those skills forward that made me really want to go into the Navy. And helped to drive me towards being a Navy medicine person as well.
Okay, I want to reflect on a couple of things you told in that story. That is a very interesting story because that speaker probably was actually quite sincere.
100%.
Right? It was the absolute beginning of that professional role, and the House of Medicine hadn't quite figured out how to do that. I did not know physician assistants started in that part of the country, but fun fact, advanced practice providers were started right here at the University of Colorado at the Anschutz Medical Campus, so which is an allied type program. And now, of course, every clinical department in the School of Medicine has a pretty significant APPPA group.
Absolutely.
So it's very interesting how times change.
It is.
Yeah. Now, here's what else is interesting. My mother was a nurse, and I was a telemetry monitor reader to put myself through college. And I was a candy striper when I was in high school. I was highly exposed to the medical system, hospital medicine, and I wanted to like it. And it was simply not my calling. I couldn't walk into a patient room without my heart beating out of my chest. And I'll never forget, I was reading telemetry monitors, watching for people to have a code. In the intensive care unit, it was a great job for college because I would just study and everybody's lying very still. And all the providers are highly trained and they can handle it. But I was friends with the nurses and they'd say, "Oh, help me with this patient." And I'd come around from the desk because everybody was fine. And the sounds of the machines in the room. And I remember just just having such a visceral feeling like the faster I can get out of this room is better. Like I was just like, I gotta get back. I gotta get back. However, the hospital supervisor would come around and do her rounds. She'd go from OB to the ED, to the intensive care unit where I was, and she'd tell stories about people dying and being born. And I would listen to, watch her talk, and I'd listen and I'd think, what are you people doing? Like, I could make this hospital work so much better. I mean, does anybody hear how this is happening, And so I ended up wanting to study medicine and make it better. But I never, one time I couldn't make myself. I'm so grateful for people who are called to take care of patients, but it just never, got me. And I'm curious, how did you test the hypothesis that you would want to be a provider?
I tested it a lot. All the way through high school, there was a mentor of my dad's who became a mentor of mine, his name was Michael Greenberg. He was a small town physician, very interesting guy. And this was the days when a third-year medical student was doing appendectomies without a surgeon in the room. I mean, these were very different than today. But he was very capable. And he had a small rural practice where he delivered babies. He had a full primary care practice. And then had these patients that just loved him, because he would go out of his way and he knew what was going on with them.
He's the old-time family physician.
100%.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I spent time with him and would go in the clinic with him. And on some patients, we were in there for 5 minutes and he knew everything he needed to know and he did exactly what he needed to do with them. And other patients, like, Mickey, why are we still in this room? He's like, because I know this guy and he needs 10 more minutes. And it was just so wonderful to see what an art it was for him and how important it was that he gave the patient what they needed. And he was so patient-centric that I really found a love for that beauty of the relationship that he had. And then I went to the Naval Academy, which is its own story. But as I was there, I really had a dilemma around the decision to stay in or go into medicine, which is a challenging route from the Naval Academy, or to go into the Marines and be a Marine infantry officer, which was really what my passion was at the time. And for a variety of reasons, I ultimately chose to go into medicine, partially because I got in, which is a huge help, but also because I asked some mentors after that and said, I'm still really thinking about putting this off for 5 years and going and being a Marine officer and pursuing this passion. And they said, Ian, you'd do really well if you took care of Marines as a doctor. And if you'd go to med school and then come back to us, we'd really appreciate it. And so now I feel like I'm kind of full circle. I'm finally back with the Marines after all these years. It's been, 2012 when I was having those conversations. So it's been 13 years. And now I'm kind of fully coming around.
Wow. Ties into your ability to set goals into the future, right? Okay, then we have to talk about, how did you decide to go to the Naval Academy?
I came from a really small town where only about 50 to 60% of the kids graduate high school, let alone go to college. And there were some very bright kids there. I mean, I wasn't first in my class by any means, but I felt that the opportunities for most kids were to go to a community college, which felt a little bit like high school. I knew what it was like. I went to my dad's college and spent a lot of time with many of the people who had just graduated my school. There were very similar antics, and I didn't really want that. Then there was Penn State, similar cliques that continued at the school. You'd go spend time with 2 years above you at Penn State as a senior very easily, and it felt like you were still in high school. And I didn't like that, and I wanted something different. I didn't see a path for myself to the Ivies because they are very competitive to get into, and there weren't very many opportunities to expand. And some people did make that path, but I didn't really see it for me either. I wanted something different. And so I had always thought about service. I told you about my dad, and my mom was JROTC when she was in high school and was very involved as well. And I think military service is strong in my family. And so I saw the opportunity to have an alternate educational path, an alternate leadership path, and the military service all in one, and really thought that was super interesting. This was when I was in 7th or 8th grade. And so I asked around. We went down and visited the Naval Academy when I was in 8th grade. And I came back very motivated. And I went to an English teacher who was a mentor, and I said, how could I get myself known to some of the people who will ultimately have to choose me as a senatorial or congressional choice for a Naval Academy slot. And they said, why don't you write him a letter? That's a great idea. I should do that. So I wrote him a letter. And just like my letters for Christmas, I wrote him a letter and I said, this is who I am. It's really nice to meet you. I want you to know what I've done to date and what I'm going to do in the next year to prepare myself to be a selectee for your ultimate nomination. And I will write you an annual letter that will talk about what I'm going to do. And I did that every year. And when I showed up to my interview for Congressman Peterson, who now is Glenn Thompson, and Glenn Thompson is still there, they turned over that year at my board, and so both were there. And I remember sitting down, and the chair of the board was neither of them. They never chaired their own board. He was a Air Force colonel who was an Air Force Academy grad. And he said, you know, Ian, I have many questions for you, but I ultimately know the answers to most of them because you've written all these letters. So now that we're here, what do you want to talk about? It was quite a wonderful experience. I was very lucky. And then he stood up and said, so if I gave you an Air Force Academy scholarship right now, would you take it? I was like, yes, sir, but I'd really appreciate a Navy one. He said, okay.
Okay, that's very interesting. Now you had to have a lot of presence of mind and courage to answer him like that, right? Because on the one hand, you would imagine that you'd say, yes, yes, like service, this path. But you gave him a yes and. How did you have the sort of presence of mind to do that?
I think I was maybe a little brazen. I'm a young male, so I have to take that, right? But also, I think that I had been rewarded by giving people an understanding of what I really wanted and had the presence of mind to say, I would take that 100 times over. If you sent me there, I would thrive there. And my choice would be to go elsewhere, and you have that power too. And I felt comfortable splitting that hair and saying, if you want to send me to the Air Force Academy, I would do just fine.
That is so fascinating. That is a wonderful story. And I will reflect, we just had this conversation the other night where we were talking about a potential negotiation. And I actually reflected that, one of the things that many people forget, and I often forget before I really understood, was to say what you want, to be able to actually in your mind actually think it through. What do you want? And to be able to articulate it in a moment, on a dime. Let it be on the tip of your tongue, not like the best kept secret. That story really shows that that's really good.
And I don't always do it, and certainly reflect at times that I wish I could have had the presence of mind to think of one more thing. But those times where you can and you know what you want, absolutely, it's important to accept what might be true and also offer that there's an alternative that you might prefer. And I think most people are very receptive to that idea that, okay, they would do what I want, but maybe there's another path and maybe there's a way to get to that too. As opposed to just saying, no, I won't do that, but if you want to give me this one, maybe I will.
Right.
Most people are like, I don't really want to do that. So.
Take me with you to college. So you're in the Naval Academy, and that's when you think, I really want to be a Marine?
Yeah.
And is that because of the intense military, pushing the limits, the bonds of brotherhood, all that jazz, that you were experiencing in that moment? Is that where that came from? And you thought, well, this feels really real. Medicine seems like this other thing.
I think it was all about small unit leadership. And I think, yes, it was a lot of this esprit de corps that is experienced in the Marine Corps. And I found that the people I gravitated towards were prior Marines or were current Marines. And
what are the qualities that might, do you think it's simply a selection bias? Or is it usually, right, you feel like you found your people because they're sort of like you, and then you're in that group and you learn some of the ways. What about being a Marine was comforting to you or attractive to you?
Yeah, I don't know that Marines are generally a comfortable group.
Comfort might not be the right word.
No, I think I was driven by the selflessness that Marines displayed, that in the Navy there tends to be this hierarchical structure that while it is there to serve the many, it also seems at times to be servitude towards some of the higher echelon leaders. Certainly a naval ship where there are ice sculptures in the Admiral's Mass is a odd thing for me and is something that I'm uncomfortable with. And I found very early that those types of displays were not comfortable to me. And I found myself very comforted by the idea that a Marine officer would walk along his men and women and have them take off their socks and check their feet and make sure that they were good and they weren't going to have blisters on their feet. And then he would make sure that all of their people had eaten before he would touch food. Things like that really displayed that they cared about their people and that was the most important thing to them, really spoke to me as a person who was learning about leadership and trying to understand the principles of how to be a very good leader. And that type of transformational and servant leadership was very important to me. And so I found myself gravitating towards it initially and then doing roles as a training officer of some type throughout my entire time at the Naval Academy, from my first year being a leader in my platoon to being a training corporal, which is the sophomore version of you're going to work out with the young freshmen and just be there as support and kind of go through the crap together. And then as a junior, where your job is really to develop the exercise routines and such, all the way through to being the training officer who is overall guiding the group. And I found myself enjoying that because it gave me an opportunity to build people without being negative, which often a lot of this exercise related stuff tends to be very negative. And we found a way to not make it that. And I had other people that really agreed that that was the way it should be done. And so we were able to make it what we wanted, which was so wonderful. And people felt supported and stronger because of it. Stronger as a group, stronger as individuals. When I was choosing around medicine versus the Marine Corps, the way I saw it was, I'm either going to choose to be able to do small unit leadership, or I'm going to choose another path. I found that there's a lot of opportunities for leadership in medicine that I didn't see when you think about just a doctor taking care of patients. And I hope that I've continued to try and develop that piece, that passion piece for me.
Yeah, it actually sounds like you are a natural leader, and because you're a natural leader, you're a natural learner, which means you're always trying to be better. And that story, I can just imagine, was repeated over and over. I don't know about medical school, but certainly in residency, right? Where, you're the first year and you're figuring things out, but instantly you're already asked to mentor medical students, other types of learners. As a second year, you're turning back to the first year. I mean, it's always like you're always a step ahead mentor type. So probably that is a system, at least in the learning phase, that mirrors that. Was that your experience?
I would say in my experience in residency, I found myself in a mentorship role in a way amongst my classmates, but I would say it was for a different reason. I had practiced as a full-time physician, general medical officer for several years. So coming back to the community as a resident, I felt comfortable with making decisions. A bunch of interns had never ordered Tylenol, let alone an important drug that may harm somebody. And so making decisions was very, very hard. And I had that on my conscience full time for several years. So those decisions were not as weighty to me. And so I didn't have to have the same mental burden that they did as an intern to think through every decision ad nauseum to really feel good that that was the right decision. And I had more space. And so I felt comfortable saying, hey, let me take that planning thing off of your plate. Let me make sure we all get together every once in a while and we all check in on each other. Everyone come over to my house and let's have, some pizza and some beers and just relax. Doing that gave us all a little bit of time to reflect and maybe be a little more present when we were in the hospital.
In addition to, just being a physician or being an officer, these jobs are stressful and long hours, and probably you have multiple jobs at once. And many interns, you're reminding me, the residents talk about it certainly, work-life balance, or, we work so many hours. How can you make this happen? And often people are, young in age, young in career. It happens to be when they're starting a family. I mean, my gosh, I think back to my days when I was getting my PhD, doing my postdoc, writing my first grants. I had little babies. I mean, I was like, we got our first video camera when I was pregnant with my son, and it was it's old school. It's the kind where you plug it into the TV to watch it. And, you just let the little cassette go and, don't back it up, don't touch it, we're going to wreck the film. And so I was like, what do we have on here? Let's, we'd plug it into the TV, and I'll never forget this. Plug it into the TV. Here I am. And it had to be my husband filming me. I'm very pregnant with number 2. I have a toddler. And I looked so tired. I looked like I was gonna fall over. All I could think is like, give that woman a chair. Somebody, and I remember like I was feeling that tired, but I didn't think I looked that tired. I looked that tired. But we've all been there. It is just this really difficult time of life where you're doing all this new stuff, you're trying to get established, you might have a young family. How do you how did you deal with it, and how do you now, with people coming behind you, attend to that?
I would say a couple things. I was really blessed by the opportunity to be able to be a general medical officer, because as I said, it took some of that mental burden off of those first years. Going out and being able to make some decisions on your own may not be standard of care these days, but the Navy has allowed it to continue. And I'm really thankful for the opportunity, because what it comes down to is I got the opportunity to take care of patients and find myself as a practitioner. So when I came back as an intern the second time, I felt very comfortable with everything I was doing. And really what I needed to do was learn the medicine. So the balance was much easier because I didn't have so much stress. And I also had just worked a job where I was my own boss. I was the head of a clinic, and I had 50 people reporting to me, a couple civilians. I had people in 8 continents. It was crazy. And I was deploying intermittently. And so to come back from that, where I was working 100 hours, to come back to the ER, and I was like, actually, I'm working less than I was in Hawaii. It felt really good because I understood why somebody would work those extra hours and what they mean in terms of trying to get the right things done. So I think giving some perspective is very, very helpful, and telling somebody, if only you just saw this perspective, doesn't usually help them. And so from a mentorship perspective, it's not great to tell them, oh, you should just see this.
You're actually not working that hard, right?
That's never
It could be worse.
Totally.
Yeah, that doesn't help.
No, but I do think that there's some aspects of reflection that allow people to really see their job differently and maybe be a little more present. And so I talk about this in terms of synergy. So when I was in Hawaii, we had 2 hours at the start of every day where you're required to be there at 7 a.m., but between 7 and 9, you can either work or you can work out. And it's the expectation of the NSW community that they exercise for several hours. And so I got that exercise in every day. And I found that it was very balancing, that I would actually go into work earlier than that and do some work, and use that 2 hours as a reflection time for me to swim and run and do whatever other exercise that really helped me to think through the problems I was chewing on from the day before and from that morning, so that when I got done with my exercise, I had a plan. What else am I going to do today? How am I going to work through that problem that seems hard to manage? And I found myself relying on the same types of activities to try and help me get through the problems that were in residency. I get done with a shift, and I had a really hard patient encounter. Somebody died on me that I thought could have lived. I had a really hard code, or I had something occur that was really challenging. You go for a jog, and that sometimes it's a 2-mile jog, and sometimes it's a 10-mile jog because you really need to work that one out. But I found it to be a really good way to reflect and just center yourself, especially before you go back and spend time with family. one of the biggest challenges, I think, for people is that you become so tired from a day of stressful work that when you go back to your family, you're not actually very present. And sometimes you're irritable. And to be able to step back from that and find some way to gap that time so that you can process what you've done and then go back and be a part of your family. And whatever it is for people, find that thing that is centering for you. And I have, for some people, been able to help them find it, and for other people it's a little more opaque, and I ask them to kind of work through that on their own. But find the thing over a course of a week, keep a journal for a week, and just say, what was the thing from today after which I felt the best? And do that for a week. Most of the time they know what it is. Because it's very easy to, after the day, be like, I went and I read a book. I went and I sat in a room quietly and just stared at the ceiling. Whatever it was that really made them feel centered. Some people it's meditation, yoga, exercise, whatever it is. And that thing is going to be the thing that brings you back when you're in a bad place and helps you to process the challenges of your day. And I think that's real work-life balance, because it really re-energizes you and helps you to see the big picture of what you were doing, and often gave me a little bit of extra emphasis to study, to think harder about the thing that I didn't do well, to move on to a different project that I was working on, that, research project, writing a little bit more in my, on a paper that I was writing or what have you, to really kind of put you back in the right frame of mind to do that well.
That is such great advice. That's another leadership practice, of course, journaling. And I think it's actually so fascinating what you can learn about yourself by journaling. I'll often have people, almost do a self-assessment where you can't, if you ask them something like, right, what would work for you to decompress? And they'd be like, I don't know, but if they either try a number of things and write down how it was, and like I always say, put a lovely notebook next to your bed, open it up, 30 seconds, write whatever you're supposed to reflect on, and then close it. Don't look at it, don't flip back and look at it, just keep moving, next page, and I'll have people go for a couple of weeks, a month, and then you look back and those notes almost look like somebody else's writing. Like you almost can't remember writing it, but it's very clear what the pattern is, right? And I'll often say, sometimes this is like, you want to make a career change, or you want to take on a new project, or you're trying to decide if you should, shift your work into whatever, just, okay, let's not think right on that. Just for a number of days, write down today, what was the most energizing thing about your day today, just in brief terms. And then if you could have a magic wand and make, have any part of your day not repeat itself. You can't take it away, but let's not do that all the time. Just write that down and keep turning the page, and you will flip back and you will know exactly what to do. It's just such a good leadership practice.
And I will say, what I always heard when people said journal was to journal every day and do it for a long period of time. And I would get 10, 15 days in and I'd stop. Over and over again I did that. Longest journal I ever kept was for a month. And it was useful, but ultimately I just lost it. But for specific purposes, to try and find something, very useful. Mm-hmm. And I like that as a secondary tool. If you're not a journaler, if you don't find yourself able to do that, just find it for a couple days. Mm-hmm. And that's enough sometimes to find the solution you need to a short-term problem, and can still be a useful tool in a toolbox full of many different options.
Right. It's good to tell people to experiment too, because what works for you this moment, might not just be the thing.
Yes.
And as you have a young child now, probably some of your practice has had to shift a little bit as this child is here, waiting for you. When my baby was a dog, it was a different game than a child, and then a child who talks,
Yes.
or a child who needs to be driven around, right? Like all the things. So, you just got to find what's working now and, continue to evolve. It's a lifetime game.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. Oh, that's great. So what are you, now you're done with your training, you're re-emerging as a new naval leader. What are you most excited about?
I'm most excited about the corpsmen, to harken back to my dad, who was this corpsman, but also really because there are many people who are interested. I'm at an academic institution with a residency program. There's a large faculty of emergency medicine providers who are very interested in building up the emergency medicine residents, and I am too, and I'm passionate about that. But there are a lot of people focused on the emergency medicine residents. And there's not a lot of people focused on the corpsmen who got 9 to 12 weeks of training and are going to be our hands and eyes and ears when we're out there on the field.
So when you say corpsmen, are they medics?
Medics.
Medics, okay.
So in the Navy, we use a different term for a medic.
Okay. I'm still learning the cross-service lingo, so I want you to
Army and
explain.
Air Force use combat medic as their term.
Okay.
And then they can do different versions or different levels of medic. We use a hospital corpsman, which is our base level. Every medic goes through essentially a 9-week training followed by a couple months of military type training after their basic. And then we have a secondary course of instruction, which is a 1-year independent duty corpsman training pipeline. And that is to create an independent provider. This is the internal APP of the military. That is a physician extender. They work on their own, on our license, but are indirectly watched, and we review their notes and review the patients they take care of and make sure that things are going well. But ultimately, they take care of patients on their own, and they do a lot of primary care. And in times of need, they do a lot of, more combat medicine. And
so you're focused on their development?
I'm just they are so hungry for knowledge. And with the basic knowledge that they have from their training, it's great, but a lot of it is do this, then do this, then do this. It's a lot of memorization. And it doesn't click. So a lot of people feel like, I don't really feel comfortable with what I'm doing, or I don't really remember, and I don't know why. So giving them some background. Why is this happening? What's happening with this patient? What are we thinking about? Why is it we're doing all these things? Bringing research into it. These kids love it. They get so excited about it. And so even just recently, we were in the field for 10 days, and we spent our on time in the ER doing, patient encounters. And then we spent our off time doing education around the things that went well and the things that went poorly, and how do we make it better, and, why didn't I know about that specific physiology, and how would I take care of that patient better? And every one of them, you watch them get better day by day. And it was so fun. And so there's such a steep learning curve, and they are so interested in getting better. And again, they're going to be the majority of the care for the forward deployed soldier, or Marine, or Navy sailor. And so I think that they are the future, and we need to really put the time and effort into them.
So do you want to build systems to do that if they're not lucky enough to work for you?
So there are systems, there are training evolutions for the Navy. They send people to places like Chicago, and they go and work in some rural trauma centers. Chicago and then rural, but it's not in main downtown Chicago.
So sort of immersive experiences to get the repetition.
Absolutely. But we're also creating some experiences and partnerships across the Virginia region, where we work with the Naval Special Warfare groups that are in our region and ask them, hey, if we come over and do some training for you guys for emergency medicine, can we bring some of our corpsmen along so they learn it too? And then afterwards, when you guys do live tissue training, or you do some type of trauma simulation, can we bring our guys and have them do some of that too? And they've been very open to that. We help them, they help us, and we all get better together. And those types of partnerships really can help to develop those young corpsmen who really desire and are excited about all the learning that they can get.
That's awesome. Okay, so just to reflect for, most of our listeners from the Mentors Desk podcast are early career or novice researchers, or people who are very interested in generally engaging with those people. So whether they're industry people or government people, active duty. And for this series on military medicine, we'll have a broader audience. What do you want people to know about what's important and interesting and timely about thinking about military medicine and research now?
I think for the researcher who wants to be a researcher but isn't yet, who really is trying to figure out, can I do this or can I find a space there? I would say it's a lot easier than you think, and it feels like a huge lift and will be a lot of work. But ultimately, if you give it a shot and you reach out to some people and say, I have an idea, here's some part of it, I want to try and work with you on that. Many people will say, this is really exciting. Maybe it's not that good, but it doesn't really matter. It's exciting that you want to do this thing and you have an idea.
So your enthusiasm will carry the day, even if it needs a lot of work?
100%,
Okay.
Because realistically, a new researcher is not a PI. They're going to have somebody who's going to help shape that. And so dive in, go in with both feet, find a PI, cold call them, email them. A lot of times we all respond. Write them a letter, whatever it is. And it's so helpful because you find people who are willing to take that. One of my biggest lessons was giving a phone call when I was at the SEAL Delivery Vehicle Unit. And I gave a phone call to one of my old mentors when I was here as a medical student, who was an emergency medicine physician and works in the residency program. And I called Jenny Buchanan and I said, Jenny, I am way out of my league. I'm supposed to be like trauma response. I have a surgical kit, but I'm not a surgeon. I was trained in internal medicine. I don't know anything about trauma. And here I am. I'm going to go out with a ventilator and a bunch of SEALs, and hopefully they don't get hurt, because if they do, it's on me and I have to take care of them. Can I please come to Denver Health or UC Health and try and get some training? And ultimately, they sent me some resources. I couldn't come out here full time for a variety of reasons, including COVID, but they offered a lot of support. And it was that connection that ultimately got me back here, got me connected with the Center for Combat Research, and got me into this research piece. And so those cold calls sometimes are related to what you're doing right now, and sometimes are related to something 2 years from now, 3 years from now. So ask the question, and you will find that people will be impressed and excited by your excitement and your motivation, and that will carry the day. And then for the people who are already in it, I think, there are many facets to military research that are not thought about by military members. Military members are in the day-to-day, here's what we all think about, and we have a specific focus because we are working next to warfighters, because we are doing military medicine on a day-to-day basis, and we're thinking about the wars of the past. And sometimes we have blinders on. There are many aspects of some future fight that none of us are thinking about. And I couldn't really name them, but I think that there are other people out there that have ideas or thinking about, what if this happens? How would we respond to that? And if you have those ideas, explore them, because you would be surprised how important it is that somebody is asking a question that they're just a little curious about. And that can carry so much weight. Think back to, Art Kellerman, who was in the ER and was thinking about, have we even thought if a gun in the home protects people or hurts people? And in the end, he found that maybe it didn't, and that created a long career for him as a public health researcher. And there are many stories similar. And I think just asking a question, talking back to Michael Greenberg, the guy who's one of my mentors, the physician who's one of my mentors, he said, you should always be counting something or studying something. If you aren't, you probably aren't making yourself better. And he was always keeping a tally of, so in the last guy we gave Tylenol before this or after this, or we gave ice, or we did this intervention, whatever it was. and I'm going to keep a tally of how they did and get some idea. And he wasn't doing studies, but he was doing informal studies in his rural clinic of all of his patients getting vasectomies and his tonsillectomies and all these things. And he knew exactly what helped people, and it was quite wonderful. So measure something and find that angle that's different than what everyone else is asking and start asking the question.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Of course, thank you. This is wonderful.